It's been quite some time since I answered comments or other questions in one of my random shop stuff videos, but Jonas now had a good question. It has been 3 years since you made your big dust collector. If you do a random shop stuff 24, could you please give an update on how it's holding up? I recently rewatched the building of it and so on. Let's have a look. On the outside, it is more or less in a perfect condition. So let's rather look at the inside. Let's start with the dustbin, which is still made out of OSB. Less than ideal, since OSB is not really the most airtight material, but it still works, so no reason to change. And this definitely needs an emptying. And this is always the coolest thing to look at when you're emptying one of these bins. Not too interesting this time, not too many different wood species or different colored lines that you can see, but still always kind of nice to look at, and now I have to empty it.
Emptying this bin is always a mess. A few years ago I tried putting the red bag inside the bin, but that didn't really work because it always got deflected. But since I only have to do that twice a year or so, I don't mind it being messy. Also, I have the shop vac running to catch a little bit of the airborne dust. It's not really effective because of the low airflow of a shop vac, but it's better than nothing. But a shop vac is good for compressing the bag.
Since my workshop is so small, every time I empty the dustbin it gets really dusty everywhere in the shop and especially in the air. So every time after I did that I open 3 parts of the duct system that are spread in the workshop and let the dust collector run for a few minutes to cycle the whole air, filter it and clean it.
And that's also a good opportunity to clean myself.
What also got asked from time to time over the years was, what do I do with my sawdust? And the thing is, the stuff that gets collected in the dust collector, which is sawdust and every other kind of debris, I basically just throw into the trash. And I have to do that with these red bags. Now, to understand why, in Germany where I live, we have 2 trash cans that get emptied every other 2 weeks. One for organic waste, one for regular trash. We also have to separate plastics, paper and metals and bring them to a recycling center separately, but the rest is for the second trash can. Every one is basically the same size from the outside, but from the inside and the actual trash volume that you've got depends on what you need. We have kind of a small medium one and we pay a certain amount of money for that. If you have more trash, you can get a bigger trash can and also pay more for that. Quite logical. But then at the occasions where we have quite a bit more trash, for example when I have to empty a dust collector, I can get these red bags for about €2 each, and these will also get picked up with the trash cans and other bags won't. Actually quite a simple, fair and logical system. Okay, now let's look at the filters in this filter box. Oh, that was like that before, but still these seals stick quite well. Well, in here it looks relatively clean. There's a little bit of buildup down here, but not too bad. And the filters are in a state where they need a little bit of cleaning. So let's pull one out. This pre-filter that I made and that's held in place with this wire frame, that's pretty dusty as usual. And down below, the actual filter, this is what it looks from the inside. This is from the outside. The outside is still pretty clean. And yeah, but they are in a need of cleaning.
You can see how I cleaned the pre-filters. The main filters I cleaned outside with compressed air, but didn't film that.
Alright, I got all the filters cleaned and also the filter box a little bit. And now let's kind of take a look inside the blower.
There is no damage to the impeller, but you can see a dust layer on the inside of the fins. And that's all I can show of the impeller because there's no space for a camera elsewhere in the blower. But I can explain more about that dust layer.
Fortunately, I still have one of my old impellers so I can show you. What always happens with the actual impeller in the dust collector is as it spins, there is always a higher pressure zone on the front of the blades than it is on the back of the blades. And that kind of creates a vacuum on the back of the blades, and that attracts dust. And that dust will stick there and start to build up. And when a lot of dust has built up, every once in a while some of that falls off and goes into the filter box. That may sound like an insignificant problem, but the weight of the dust kind of throws off the balance of the impeller. And I also can notice that because sometimes the whole blower runs with less vibration and sometimes with more. And every time I empty the dustbin and clean the filters, I also try to clean that dust buildup off of the impeller blades.
It's impossible to show, but I blow some compressed air against the inside of the fins, which removes the dust. You can also hear how the impeller starts to spin because of that. And to get the dust out, I turn on the dust collector for half a second, and my shop vac hose catches all the dust that comes out. Yeah, look at how well this works. So after that's done, I reinstall the filters and let the dust collector clean the air again. It took about 5 minutes to get it completely clean again.
Okay, now it's cleaned again and running again, and basically just as well as on day one when I built a new blower housing and impeller. I can't really say more and show more without looking inside it, and looking inside it would require taking apart everything, and I really don't want to do that. So that's basically all I can say, and the next update on that would be when I want to upgrade something or modify anything, or if it breaks again. But while we're looking at dust collectors, let's have a look at the small one I built many years ago and now use with the CNC router. It is pretty much full, and so it's also a perfect opportunity to have a better look at it, clean it and see how it's holding up.
But first I need to remove all the crap in front of it.
Okay, I brought it into the shop and let's have a closer look at that. First of all, the much better and much nicer system to release the bucket. This still works so nicely. And the funny thing is, there is a dust collector series from Laguna, and they use a very similar system to mine, and their dust collector series was released about a year after I've built this and posted my 4 videos about building it. So maybe they got some inspiration from that.
Emptying this bucket is more or less the same as before, but now I have the big dust collector running, which sucks up the airborne dust, and that works really well. Maybe you think, why aren't I just dumping the bucket into the bag? And I had the same idea, but maybe a bit too early. Look at that genius. But hey, it worked. The bucket is empty.
Okay, let's look at the filters. Wow, there is quite a bit more inside. But I also think this hasn't been opened or cleaned for more than 2 years. But it's also interesting to see where and how the dust accumulates inside here. But all the dust that accumulated here looks like MDF, and also the thick layer on these filters here looks like MDF. And I just cut MDF on the CNC router, and the bucket was about this full, so I think the whole separation loses a lot of efficiency once the bucket is too full. I should empty it when it's about here. I should make a mark on this glass piece here to see when I have to empty it.
The filter concept is the same as in the big dust collector.
Wow, the amount of dust in here is quite shocking. I would have never thought that it would be that clogged. Well, it's not clogged, but that full. That really cries for a cleaning.
Here I tried something to use compressed air inside the shop without making a mess. And that actually worked really good.
I used some more compressed air outside and got them pretty clean again. Alright, now let's look at the other more interesting parts and see how they are holding up. On the intake chute there also is some dust buildup, which means that this joint here is not fully airtight and there can get, some dust can get through there. And here at the intake chute there's the same dust buildup at the edges or the corners. Funny is that in here there's still some confetti that I sucked up as a demonstration, because there you can see the separation so nice about 3 years ago. And there's still some in there. Now at the motor, right here, there was a hole and you could see the impeller. So I sealed that off with a block of wood, and there's also some dust buildup. So could be accumulated from the dust that is in the air over the years, or there is still some suction. Interesting. This is no dust, this is actually silicone that I used to seal that hole up. It just looked like a dust buildup. Yeah, okay, so that's still airtight. Inside the blower housing it looks pretty clean, which is nice, but the best thing is that this protective screen here, which protects the wooden impeller from any bigger pieces, is perfectly clean. And that means that the separator down here makes a perfect job of separating the bigger pieces. Okay, now the really interesting stuff, the impeller. Visually, I would say it is in a new state. It still runs true and basically also balanced, because I never felt any big vibrations from it running. But it also has that dust buildup on the inside of the fins. And that is again due to the same reason. As it spins, these surfaces of the fins accelerate the air, which creates a higher pressure area on the outside than on the inside. And the lower pressure on the inside attracts the dust, and over time it just accumulates. What you also can clearly see is that the dust buildup right here in this area is a lot more than on the outside. And I think that's because the overall airspeed closer to the center is a lot slower than on the outside.
Here it's easy to clean the fins.
The impeller is secured to the shaft with a M8 lock nut. Let's remove that. And it should slide off. It should. It's quite slow, but it comes off. Why does it take so long? It was the wood. Quite a bit of dust buildup inside here as well, and I shouldn't lose this key. Without the dust, you can also see that these parts of the motor casting all have a crack exactly at the same place. And what does this tell us? Well, sharp corners or sharp turns like this are never good to prevent cracks. But it's also strange why this would crack in the first place, because the only weight or load this part has to support is the motor weight on its own, and that's not much. But also, these cracks shouldn't matter at all. And if you ask yourself where I got that motor, it is from a pool pump, and I got this from eBay for about 15 euros. When we look at the impeller construction, there's a thick flange out of 2 layers of birch plywood, and the hole in it fits pretty tightly around this part of the shaft. That was also the reason why it was so hard to get off. The shaft had kind of a brass sleeve with a hex part on the end. This is embedded in one of the discs of the flange, and it also has a keyway in it for this little key that I almost lost in the dust. The 2 impeller discs are also birch plywood with curved grooves in it for the MDF fins, and nothing of that is damaged in any way. So yeah, that's pretty much all I can say about that. I also have a video about building that, and in that you can see everything in a lot more detail. So let's put it back on. First the keyway when it's up. Also, for quite some time now I have the idea to replace this impeller, which has 12 fins, with one that is built exactly the same but only has 11 fins, and then compare it in terms of performance, efficiency and especially noise. So what would you think about that? Would that be interesting? I now turned it upside down to have a quick look into the separator, and I knew that I have to remove screws here to get to that. Here you can also see the seal for the bucket, which seems to be in a good shape, but also a little dusty. So let's remove that disc. Inside the separator there's also some dust buildup, and especially around this pipe here. And I don't really know what causes it. Maybe also a low pressure zone around it when it's in use and the dust spins around there. Or it gets statically charged during use, or a combination of both, or something totally different. If anybody of you knows, write it in the comments. And maybe you're also asking what material this is. This is 0.8 millimeter thick polyethylene, and I can buy it in the hardware store. It's sold as roll glass here. I don't know if your hardware stores have that available as well, but that's what it is. On another separator that I have, I used 3 millimeter thick polycarbonate, and that I ordered online. And regarding this topic, the cyclone of my big dust collector is made out of 0.6 millimeter thick aluminium sheet that I got from a local factory. And the blower housing of my big dust collector is made out of 0.8 or 1 millimeter thick steel sheet. Enough dust collection, onto another topic. rather a behind the scenes one. I think we all can agree that ever since I got my new microphones, and especially the lav mic I'm wearing here, my audio quality, and especially the one when I'm talking, got a lot better. And I already got quite used to wearing it all the time and working with it. And it's wireless, that's nice, but that of course also means that it runs on battery. And well, Rode claims that it lasts up to 8 hours, and the reality is it lasts more or less 7 hours. So that means I basically have to charge it every day. And that's not really a problem, but I wanted a nice and elegant solution for that. So I designed and 3D printed kind of a docking station. This is now the final result. And this one just slides in here. And this one with the sleeve, which makes it more comfortable to wear, right here. They of course have a little bit different sizes. But right now that doesn't help anything for charging. So the USB Type-C port is on the bottom, and right through here the cords can fit. And here are 2 holes for screws. And the screws I'm using are actually spare parts of my 3D printer. And now with the charging cords at the right place, I can tighten down the screws, which will tighten the cords into place. Now when I pull them out, the cable stays in place. And when I now put it in, it meets perfectly with the port and will start charging. Same for this side. Like so, it basically works, but it's not really practical. So I printed this kind of mount, and now I made a mistake. These have to go through this first. This kind of stand now joins right here, and there are some screw holes for joining it together. The cords can come out the back, and here I also have 2 mounting screws, and now I can mount it anywhere here in the shop. And when I'm done for the day with the mics, I just take them, put them in here, and they will charge overnight and are ready for the next day. I will probably put this somewhere in my dustproof charging box, but I have to tidy that up first a little bit. And yeah, then I think I have a nice and elegant solution. Now, quite often I'm asked how I tackle such a design with a real piece. And the way I always do that is I take the piece to the computer with a dial indicator and just start drawing what I have in mind. And then take many measurements of the real piece, everything that I can imagine is useful and necessary. And then I just work these dimensions into the design. And eventually I have a first prototype. And here it fit relatively okay. And I also tested here if 2 screws could clamp 2 cables at the same time. And also tested the alignment of the ports. And that was wrong, the clamping worked, and the fit wasn't really great here. I didn't allow for enough clearance for the knobs or for the buttons, and so I worked that into the second prototype. There's no clearance for the buttons, and also there's clearance for the screen so that it is only guided on its edges and I don't get scratches. And the port is at the right place. And that was a great fit on the second try, so I stayed with that. Then I made the same for the one with the sleeve. And here I was more or less lucky because here the first try was basically perfect. And I think there was just a misalignment with the port. So I did a second one, but not as tall to save time and material. And that was then correct. And then I tried a double station, which worked fine. But then there was still a slight misalignment with the ports. And
that then leads to the final version. And for this thing, I don't know how I would call that. That worked basically. I could screw it together, but there was also a slight misalignment with the ports for the cables. But everything else more or less worked on the first try. And that design I just made to fit this here. I made sure the screw hole locations are all at a smart place, so nothing interferes with each other. And yeah, when I assemble it on a computer and if it works there, then it most likely also works on the real piece. Of course, I also have to take care that everything is printable without supports. That's always my goal. And yeah, that's how that came out. And yeah, just the slight misalignment. So the second version is already the final version of this. And now it's done. And that's how I usually tackle such designs.
Now if you like this and also have this microphone, the RODE Wireless Go, and a 3D printer, you can make this yourself. I will publish the files on Thingiverse for free. You will then only need 2 M3 nuts and 2 M3 bolts that are 30 millimeters long. Usually that is included in a 3D printer as spare parts, and also 2 screws to screw it together and 2 to mount it to any surface. And well, then you can make this yourself. Of course, the design will be made to fit the naked microphones, not with this sleeve that only I have because my mom made this for me. So yeah, it will fit, how do I get this off? It will fit just this shape 2 times. And yeah, you don't have the sleeve. I really doubt that there are many people who can make a good use of this, but if you want to, the link is in the video description. And now for the last topic, the current state of the bandsaw. So what I'm doing here at the moment is upgrading the bandsaw with a variable frequency drive to get a slow start and variable speed. And I also made new pulleys for a poly V-belt. A lot more detail is in the 2 dedicated videos about this that I have published so far. Now there's a slight problem because I made this pulley ratio so that when the motor spins at full speed at 50 Hertz, that I then have a cutting speed of 25 meters per second. That's what I wanted. That's also about 1200 RPM on this wheel. And I also can't go higher than that because higher than that, the rubber on the wheel, which is just a bicycle inner tube, starts to come off, which is kind of scary to look at. Now when I want to run the saw at lower speeds for cutting metals, for example, I can just do that with a variable frequency drive. But the problem there is that the cooling of the motor from its fan is reduced by a lot, and that can cause the motor to overheat and, in the worst case, burn out. I also knew that in the first place, thinking I would never really cut metals that long. But thinking more about that, what if I do? And also many people mentioned that in the comments. So what I'm now thinking to do is to change the pulley ratio to something that I have to run the motor at like 70 or 80 Hertz to get the saw to full speed. And then when I want to cut at low speeds, the motor will still run quite fast and cool itself properly so that I will never run into heat issues with the motor. The problem now is that changing the pulley ratio means making new pulleys. For the motor pulley, it's pretty simple. I could just turn it smaller, but for the wheel pulley, I would have to make a whole new one. And that would also not be that big of a problem. But if I do that, I will do all of that off camera because I already made 2 videos just about making these pulleys. You don't need a 3rd one showing exactly the same again. So yeah, that's the current state of the bandsaw, and I still haven't received the new variable frequency drive. So I still have some time to do that.
Well, and the next day I started making the new pulley. I cut the rough shape from a sheet of polyethylene with a CNC router, used a jig to turn the belt profile on the lathe, and mounted it centered on the wheel. After that, I reduced the size of the motor pulley, and now I can go on once the VFD arrives.
It's been quite some time since I answered some comments or questions in one of my random shop stuff videos. Random shop stuff, yeah. So what I'm doing here at the moment is upgrading the bandsaw with a